Did you know that there are times when having more money actually can make you happier? It's true, and there is data to back it up. And that's why on today's conversation, I am talking with John Coleman, author of the book Good Money, all about what actually makes us happier, what doesn't make us happier, and how we need to think about money as Christians, because it's very different than how the rest of the world thinks about it. You see, so often we get messages from the culture that says you should have more, 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 and that will make you happier. But then we also get messages from the church that say you should just be happy with what you have and you should never strive for more. And you should just be content with your lot in life and never try to improve. And honestly, there are big problems with both ends of the spectrum. And that's what we're talking about on today's discussion. Now, just a heads up, this is not necessarily a conversation about how to get money if you have none in the first place. If you are flat broke, this conversation may not resonate with you. But if you're someone who says, I do have enough for my family's needs, I do have a little bit more than I probably need, and I'm trying to figure out how to steward the money that I have well, and this is a conversation you absolutely are going to want to listen into, because we talk about some of the very pervasive myths in our culture, some of the mindsets that it's really easy to fall into, and basically how to think about, as a Christian who has some money in their bank account, how do we steward this well to live the good life that God is providing for us and not miss out on the boat for us or for our children. So if that's you, make sure that you listen in to this very interesting conversation. Well, John, it is so good to talk with you today. I know that this is going to be a topic. Well, obviously, it's going to be a topic that's relevant to everyone. We all use money in some capacity of our life. But I want to talk to you specifically as somebody who spends so much time in the intersection between faith and money. Like, what are you seeing in the ways that people, Christians especially, are relating to money these days?
Yeah, absolutely. Brittany, thank you for having me on. I am not a godly woman, but I'm privileged to be married to one. And so this is a wonderful forum to be able to speak. I think Christians are subject to many of the challenges in the broader culture around the way that we think about money. We get sucked into thinking that our net worth is something we can equate with our identity or our worth as people, which is obviously not true. We get sucked into the comparison trap, looking at others to see what they have, always wanting just a little bit more. And we really fundamentally get drawn into looking at money as a goal or an ends of itself, rather than just as a means to achieve the more meaningful parts of life, relationships, generosity, experiences, purpose, meaning, those sorts of things. And I think Christians are less susceptible to that because the scriptures are so clear on money. Money's mentioned 2,350 times in the Bible. It's one of the most mentioned topics. Often those are cautionary mentions about avoiding the love of money, which is the root of all kinds of evil. But still, we fall prey to the same things in the broader culture, and we can miss those, whether we're struggling to make ends meet or whether we have an excess of wealth, and we find all the problems associated with that. And the point of this book was really to help reorient Christians and non-Christians alike around the broader topic of human flourishing. What is the good life? How can we live a good life? And how can money be a tool to achieve that rather than something that can stand in the way?
Yeah, and I think that's such an important and very needed conversation, especially as you mentioned the good life, because we could define the good life so many different ways, and we're going to get a very different definition depending on who you ask. Like, I'm thinking of like influencers on social media are selling a very different the good life than, what we are hearing at church on a Sunday morning selling the good life. So do you talk about in your book like how you would define the good life?
Yeah, I think it's impossible to have a good discussion about money without defining human flourishing or the good life more specifically. What I find beautiful throughout my writing, this is a mainstream book with Harvard Business Review, but the modern social science research, as you would imagine, matches up really well with what we learn from Scripture. If we think Scripture is true, the best research is going to lead us to the same outcomes. And so I really benchmark about two different thinkers' views on human flourishing in the mainstream world. One is a guy named Marty Seligman, who has something called the PERMA framework out of the University of Pennsylvania. And then the other, which I spend a great deal of time on, is from a researcher named Tyler Vanderweel out of Harvard University. He runs their program on human flourishing, which is a collaboration with Baylor and with Gallup. And they now run the broadest survey on human flourishing in the world, several 100,000 people around the world. And the way that I anchor that is in a few different areas, commonalities in the research that also resonate with biblical truth. Obviously, as Christians, we think our faith in God is a core part of that identity, and that's actually addressed in the framework, a sense of transcendence and a sense of permanence of our moral values. But beyond that, it looks at things like relationships. The depth and breadth of our positive relationships is probably the number one determinant of happiness in life in almost every framework you look at. Meaning and purpose, so feeling like your life has an impact that's positive, whether you're working at home, taking care of your kids, which is obviously one of the most purposeful things, or working outside the home. Generosity, the idea of serving others with what we have, one of the 2 or 3 most important aspects of happiness. Character and virtue, living in accordance with a set of values that you hold dear. Mental, physical, and spiritual health being a key component of that. And those are intrinsically good things in these frameworks. So things that are the component of almost any good life. Financial and material stability, which actually does exist in the Harvard framework, is positioned not as an intrinsically good things like the other 5 characteristics, but only as an enabler to making those things possible. And that's one of the core concepts that I hit on is money is such an easy scoreboard to look at, right? You can measure it. It's public. You see it in your account every day. So it's easy to get too fixated on that rather than these things that are harder to define, relationships and generosity and character. But really, money shouldn't be a goal. It should be a way of achieving those other truly meaningful things in life. And sometimes if we use it improperly, as the Bible warns, it can actually become a distraction from leaning into those things that can make us truly fulfilled. So that's kind of the framework that I use for the good life throughout.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned that money is just a tool to help us do these other things, and specifically about how it's just easier because it's measurable. Like I could look at my bank account right now, I could look it up, like this is exactly how many dollars are in there, this is how many cents are in there, but I can't look up some kind of number for my friendships of like my friendships have a 42.3, like there's no number there. And also just the comparison, like on social media, I mean, you can show off your friendship some, but it's a lot easier to show off how much money you have. And it's a lot easier to see other people showing off how much money that they have. I've read a study, it was so long ago, I'm not going to be able to quote it correctly, but I read a study that said something about like money really does make you happier up until a certain point, and then it doesn't. Do you know what study I'm referring to?
Yeah, so the very famous one 8 or 10 years ago was from 2 Nobel-winning economists, Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton. And they found that basically in today's inflation-adjusted dollars, there's not a lot of incremental happiness from an income above $105,000 a year. That's been disputed in various areas. Some people have pegged it closer to 130 or 40. But what's not in dispute is that after a certain point, whether that's $100,000 or $150,000 in annual income, the marginal happiness added by money either goes to zero or decreases. Almost everyone agrees on that. And yet, other surveys have showed, you may have seen some of these, that as you ask people how much money is enough to be happy and fulfilled for a year, the answer is entirely dependent on what they make today. And the answer is always a little bit more. So a Harris poll did a survey of thousands of people, and those with a median income of $35,000 thought $50,000 a year would make them happy and fulfilled. Those with $250,000 thought $350,000 would make them happy and fulfilled. And a fundamental tenet of human nature is unless we're really thoughtful about what is happiness and fulfillment to me, we always want just a little bit more than we have. And that's one of the things that I seek to help people get their minds around and dispel. Because the truth is, as you noted, all the research would say after a certain amount of financial stability, money really isn't a driver of happiness, particularly if it causes us to neglect our families, our friendships, the impact that we can have, and other things that give us greater purpose.
Yeah, I think that's a really easy trap to fall into on one side to say like, hey, if I just had a little bit more money, if I just had a little bit more, but like the research shows, you can always have just a little bit more and you're going to want just a little bit more. And so it's like, it's a trail, like there's no end, you just keep going. So that's a really important thing to talk about. But I also want to talk about the other side, because something that I've seen a lot in church. So, for example, at my church this very past Sunday, it's a Monday today, I believe. Like, I don't even know what date it is. Today's Monday. Yesterday was Sunday. At church, they literally were talking about that we should be content with what we have. And, there is a quote, godliness with contentment is great gain, all of that. But the whole point that he was trying to make is that we should be content with where God has placed us. That if God has placed us here, like, we shouldn't want more. We shouldn't covet. He was talking about the 10 Commandments. We shouldn't covet. We shouldn't want more. So how do we reconcile the financial world, which you are very involved in, of like wanting, like, we want to grow our wealth. That's what we do. That's the objective that we have here, with Christianity's very often claim of, well, you should just be happy with what you have and you shouldn't ever strive for more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say my own position is that money itself is not intrinsically bad. If you look at the Bible, God often blessed people with extraordinary financial wealth. So if you look at Abraham, for example, he was one of the richest men of his day. David, Solomon, even into the New Testament, where certainly the apostles were well off. Their supporters were often well off. And so money itself could be a blessing, just like any other from God. It's not the only blessing. It's not the thing that defines whether someone's, worth more or less than another human being, but it can be a blessing. The warnings in the Bible are often about falling prey to the temptation of love of money, right? Focusing on it too much. But Jesus actually provides some different parables about money, like the parable of the talents in Matthew, where he says, if you're given financial wealth, I actually want you to steward that well. The servant who got 1 talent and brought back 1 was actually punished. The servant who got 1 and brought back 10, so stewarded and invested that well, was rewarded and given more. And so I think the Bible wants us, with the wealth that we're given, whatever level that may be, to be good stewards of that, to manage it prudently, to grow that. The constraint he places on that is to never grow it purely for our own purposes, to never become obsessed with it, but to think as we grow that well about the way in which we can steward that aligned with the principles he's laid out for us. And some of that can be spent on us, so I'm not one that says you can't spend on yourself. My family and I spend on ourselves certainly all the time, but it can't be absent things like generosity. It can't be absent things like earning in a job that doesn't give you purpose or not creating impact through the job that you have. And so I think the important thing for Christians is not to be afraid of money, not to think of it as something inherently bad, but to think at any level of wealth, how can I be prudent and manage that well, grow it, steward it properly, but also have a mindset where I'm stewarding that according to the principles that God has given us.
Yeah. And I've been thinking through, like, especially this morning, getting ready for this interview, this idea of being content with what you have. Like, you would never say that to somebody in a third world country who, like, is barely surviving. You would never say, like, oh, well, you should just be content. And, like, I'm sorry, God put you in this horrible situation because he wants you to be there. That's your lot in life. You just stay there. Like, you need to be happy and you need to be content. Like, no, like, the church calls us to take care of people who have less. And so it's this whole, like, timeline is not the word. It's whole, like, this line between people who have very little, and you would have no problem saying, yes, of course you should improve your situation in life. If you have any opportunity, not only should you improve your situation, like, we should go improve your situation for you. If you don't have the resources, like, we should, like, you should have more money, you should have more means. Versus then on the other side, people who are very wealthy, and you're saying, oh, well, you shouldn't have that. Like, now it's really bad and wrong to have money. And I just don't think that there's a way to say, like, oh, okay, well, apparently there's just, like, a situation where, like, this number, if everybody has 300,000, like, then that just solves all of their problems. But it doesn't work that way. Like, there has to be getting money and improving your situation on its own can't be bad. And having money, like you said, Abraham had a lot of money on its own, can't be bad. I think it really comes back to our motivations and why we're doing it. And it cannot be just having money or not having money. And it can't just be in comparison to those around us, because somebody who's in a very poor situation even if everyone around them, you're going to say, hey, yes, improve your situation. But somebody in a middle class situation, like, well, why can't they also improve their situation? So I just feel like the argument falls apart so often when you take the time to think through it.
One, it is hard to enjoy a flourishing life if you don't have the material stability to do so, right? I'm a parent. I think you're a parent as well. We want our kids to live in a safe shelter, to have clothes, to have good food, to get a good education. There's a lot of things that go into that stability. The opposite of that study we talked about earlier is that up until that $105,000 point or $150,000 point, there is incremental gains to happiness or fulfillment because of additional material prosperity. And that's because it allows us a foundation such that we're free of the worries that accompany living without necessary resources. Everybody's point at which their lifestyle is sufficient is different. I would say that, people have different needs. But what I would ask Christians to do and think about, it's one of the concepts in the book, is to set a financial finish line. Because that study I talked about earlier, where you want just a little bit more, is based on something psychologically called hedonic adaptation. This is a very well-established principle. And it means that human beings are malleable psychologically. So as soon as we get something good, a new car, a new house, we immediately set that as our new baseline. So even though we thought it would make us super happy to get that thing, the next week we're thinking about what's wrong with it, the house the neighbors have, the car the neighbors have. And it becomes this endless chase that actually isn't rewarding, but sets us down a very materialistic path. One of the ways to get out of that is to sit down with your spouse, with your family, with your financial advisor early on and say, what is the lifestyle at which we think we could be happy, right? Maybe that includes education for your kids, the food you want, the house you want, vacations or experiences that you want to have, but trying to put parameters around that early in life so that you pull out of this comparison trap of always wanting a little bit more. And I think that is something that most Christians could do. Sit down and think through, what is a lifestyle that we would be comfortable with? And even if we start making dramatically more, our savings exceed that, we're going to stick to that. And then we can use all those additional resources to become more generous, to start a business, to invest in others, to be free of some of the constraints that constantly escalating our lifestyle puts on us. Because, the average person, when they make more money, they raise their spending. And so even very wealthy people can often get trapped in this cycle of debt, of consumption, of wanting more. It's one reason even some of the wealthiest people that we know have great credit card debt or living off car loans and things like that. We'd say, how are they doing that? And it's because their lifestyle escalates as their income does. And so I think Christians should be thoughtful about setting what is the lifestyle that makes us happy and living within that constraint so that they can have that material stability, but also assure that they're controlling their lifestyles and have the room to give to others in the way that we're intended to.
Yeah, I love that. So how can somebody who's listening to this right now, so say there's a Christian mom and she's like, okay, well, obviously, my family has to work, whatever that looks like for their family. We have to work, we have to make money, we have to give the kids new shoes because they grow out of them constantly. They're endless pits. They like blueberries and blueberries are so expensive. So obviously there has to be some portion of work that happens. How can she kind of decide, though, her motivations for her family? She's going to talk about this with her and her husband. Their motivations between, am I actually growing this in a biblical way where I'm trying to be a good steward of my money versus am I just doing this out of fear, out of comparison, out of habit at this point? Can you kind of talk through the signs or the symptoms of how is she going to know if she's doing it in a biblical way or a kind of cultural way?
Totally. I think that starts in many ways with spending. So there's a chapter on spending wisely in the book. And one of the things people should be aware of is that spending on consumption goods, material items, actually is one of the most proven ways of not becoming happy. That people think buying stuff will actually make them happier, but it rarely does, right? Again, past your material needs. And so one thing I'd encourage that Christian mom to do, maybe in collaboration with her husband or kids, is sit down and talk as a family about what is good spending. In the book, I highlight a few areas. Experiences. In our family, we have a motto, experiences, not stuff. And so we'll overspend on a family vacation. We'll take the kids to sporting events. We'll do educational trips, those sorts of things that build lasting memories. And the research shows that those actually do make you happier and they don't fade over time. Meanwhile, the research shows that buying a thing because of hedonic adaptation quickly loses its luster, that new car beyond what you really need doesn't really add a lot to your happiness. Beyond experiences, I think spending on health, mental, physical, and spiritual health can be important. We know that that's one of the intrinsically good elements of human flourishing. And so spending on that is good. I think on relationships. So money that we're spending on date nights. I mentioned in the book, childcare, my wife and I spend on a bit so that we can get away together is incredibly important. And generosity to others can be incredibly important as well. And so I'd encourage every family to sit down and think of the things we're spending on. There's obviously necessities that we have in terms of material stuff. Be honest about those. Write those down. We got 4 kids. Our shoe bills and food bills and school bills are high, right? And so you sit down and map those out. And then think beyond that, how can we stop spending on stuff that we know is just going to crowd the house and not make us happy, and refocus on these things that are more likely to build our family in a mature way? And in doing so, you can also begin to have an initial discussion about that finish line. If you go through your bills, think about what you're giving. So we can talk about giving in a moment, but I'm a big fan of percentage giving and taking it off the top, which I think we are commanded to do. But add up your giving, add up your bills that you know you need to pay. What other things you might want to add in the future if you can, vacations, experiences for the kids, college, and really write that out and think, what money do we actually need in order to meet that lifestyle if we're living in a way that will bring us real happiness and not distract us from that? And it's very easy to come up with numbers, at least within a range, and maybe with a financial advisor, where you can say, you know, at this income or net worth, we're going to cover all of that. And that looks like your financial finish line, beyond which everything else is kind of gravy. And then once you get beyond that, the thing to be careful about is not falling prey to that comparison trap where you start to chase things that you know won't bring you additional fulfillment.
Yeah, I love that. I want to talk about kind of the opposite end of the spectrum now. So we have talked a lot about how money, scientifically, data-based studies, like how it can make you happier, what things do and don't. But I know that we don't want to optimize specifically for happiness. Like, obviously, we do want to be happy, but like that's not our number one end goal, is just to like be happy. Or we could just, go do who knows what that we think is going to make us happy. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like we want to steward what we have been given by God well, that we want to live out his purpose for our life and his meaning for our life, and do the good, like all the good Christian things that we are commanded to do for a reason, because they're good and we want to do them. So what would you say to the mom who's kind of on the other end of the spectrum, who's like, I don't want stuff. Like, I don't want to buy stuff for me. Like maybe she feels really guilty even spending any money on herself or her family beyond the, essentials that you have to buy. Because she's like, hey, like I am a Christian. Like there's so many people in the world who have so much less than me. Like, how could I go think about buying a nicer house? How could I go think about buying, clothes that aren't just all hand-me-downs, when like there are so many people in the world who are struggling, and I should just be giving, as much as I possibly can to them instead. Can you talk to that, Gil?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, again, I actually don't think money in and of itself is bad, nor is all area of spending on yourself bad, right? I spend on myself. My wife does. My kids do a little bit. I think the question is, are you spending on things that actually will make you happier and more fulfilled? And you're right, happiness is not the goal. It's one reason I talk about human flourishing, which is kind of a blend of purpose, living in accordance with your values, and happiness. It's important that we not go through life miserable. So that is a component of human flourishing. And what I would tell that person is like, look, if you are going to spend on yourself, try and target that spending towards things that actually will make you a little bit more fulfilled. It doesn't mean you can't buy a nice outfit, for example, or that you have to buy everything you use, but you probably want to keep your stuff moderate, whether that's a car or a house or clothes. The research I'd communicate to them is that feels easy because it's the easiest thing to hold and that it's tangible. But really beyond the basics, it doesn't make you a lot more fulfilled. If you're thinking about spending on yourself, think about the experiences you can have, the relationships you can build, the way you can improve your health. So I know the self-care movement has many problems, but this idea of staying mentally, spiritually, and physically healthy is important. So if that's an exercise class, or if it's a hiking trip with friends, or if it's counseling that you need, spiritual counseling, etc., those can be really important so that we're anchored in our identity, so that we're physically capable of being a good parent, a good friend to others. And if you're not taking care of yourself in those ways, you can actually get off track in a way that makes it harder for you to live out your purpose according to your faith and in the lives of others. And so I really do think maintaining enough focus on self that you have a foundation that you're prepared to help others is important. my message would be to make sure that you're really thoughtful when you spend on yourself about what that is. And is this really going to get me what I want, which is feeling more fulfilled, being more engaged with others in my life. And the default I see so many people fall into is retail therapy, right? It's like, whether you're a man or a woman, by the way, I think it's, if I just get a new car, I'm going to be a lot happier, right? Maybe it will, because we needed to get a minivan. We got too many kids now. We needed to upgrade the car, a lot. But we probably didn't need a $200,000, SUV for that, right? It was about functionally meeting the needs. And then we've allocated much more time to vacations, to events, to school, to art, to things like that we think can be an important part of the kids' maturation or our own maturation.
Yeah, I love that, because I think that just chasing what everybody says on the internet with all the influencers, like, oh, you need to have this cool thing, like, it's not going to make you happy. So the purpose is not just that you should never spend money on yourself, or that you should just go spend all this money and you're like, I don't want those things. Like, that's okay. It really is going to be like, how can you steward your money well so that you're filling God's purpose for your life, which involves taking care of your family, and also involves taking care of yourself, and also involves doing something for others as well.
And I would say one quick rule of thumb that might say that you have the wrong mindset is if you're buying something because someone else has it or someone else did it. That kind of comparison not only doesn't make you happier or more fulfilled, actually getting into that mindset, even as you acquire more and more, is shown to make you less happy, because you're living in this comparison world. And so one thing we tell our kids, for example, is normal is boring. You want to be different. And anytime they come home saying, oh, everybody has these cool shoes or this like Stanley mug or whatever, we say those might be better. But if you're buying it to be like the other kids, it's a total no-go, right? Because your happiness isn't in chasing what everybody else has. And so that's a rule of thumb we use as a family, is just, are we making this purchase because it's the right thing to do, because it's actually going to be meaningful for us? Or are we trying to chase something that we're seeing online or what other people are doing? And if you fall into the latter, that psychology actually can be really destructive over time.
Yeah. And I think that's something that so often all of us do without even realizing it, because we just see like, oh, everyone has this. Well, then that's the normal thing. That's what I should be doing too. That's what I should be having too. Or like somehow I'm less than because I'm not doing this exact same thing as them.
Exactly.
So yeah, I want to ask you though, what would you say to the mom who's like, okay, this is a great conversation and all, but I'm flat broken. I don't have any money left over for anything. Like, I would love to go on vacations. I would love to be able to think about having a nicer car, but that's just not my reality at all. What would you say to the mom who's like, I am flat broken. I do not even know where to start?
Yeah, totally. And I'll preface this by saying the book, and we acknowledge this in the introduction, is primarily written for those who have or will have more than they need. Right? Addressing the problems of real financial distress is obviously more important in many ways, but also difficult to address alongside the problems of excess. I think for those who really are living in financial distress or hand to mouth, my advice would be to get back to the basics, to give yourself some grace, and really just think about what prudential management looks like. One of the pieces of advice is to try and be really prudent in your spending, to never get into debt. One of the biggest problems that we have right now is debt, particularly consumer debt, like credit cards. There's over $1.1 trillion in credit card debt right now. 56% of people are carrying credit card debt. And that's really taxing your future self for something you want to do now. I also talk about things like student loans and being prudent about student loans. One of the biggest problems for younger people, even middle-aged people now, is having accrued a huge amount of student loans that then trap them in this debt cycle that they find difficult to repay. And so for that mom thinking about a kid going to college, et cetera, I think be very thoughtful about the amount of debt you or the student takes on. There are great options between community colleges, online colleges, public universities versus private. Consumer debt, you ought to be really thoughtful about credit cards, I think, and getting into debt that you can't pay off. And a lot of it is just establishing a budget when you're living hand to mouth, trying to save up emergency savings first, and then beginning to put away money in things like retirement accounts, et cetera, so that you build a financial buffer that means that you can get out of that immediate distress, that you can live without debt that can really hamper you and get you into a vicious cycle, and that you can begin to try and accrue enough savings or wealth that you can begin to create that financial freedom over time. And again, there's a lot more to say on that topic. I mentioned in the book several times, it's much harder to be poor than to be rich, despite the fact that rich people have problems. And really just getting a very firm budget, set of expectations, and savings plan in place, I think is incredibly important if you are living in that place where you're near financial distress or you're living with financial distress.
Yeah. Well, for those people who are going to be a better fit for your book, who are like, I do have more than I need, and I really want to make sure that my mindset around money is appropriate, that I'm using it, that I'm stewarding it well, and I'm not just wasting it and trying to keep up with all of the influencer trends. Where can they go online to find out more about you and your book?
Totally. So the book will be available at every major bookseller, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It'll probably be in your local physical store as well. It's called Good Money, 6 Steps to Building a Financial Life with Purpose. And if you want to follow me individually, I've got a website, johnwilliamcoleman.com, spelled like it sounds. And then I have a Substack with a newsletter that comes out periodically called On Purpose. So if you Google John Coleman On Purpose, you'll find a Substack, and you can get periodic updates from me on some of these topics.
Love it. And final question for you. If there's a mom who's listening right now who's like, okay, you have convinced me I need to be more intentional in this area, and she's going to take a Post-it note, write something on it, put it on her mirror where she can see it every day, what would you want her to write on her little tiny Post-it note?
Okay, I'll hit a topic we haven't touched because this is actually the biggest one for our family. In writing the chapter on money and kids, I learned a lot of practices from those who have done this really well, from others that we're starting to bake into our family. And I would say on that Post-it note, write down financial apprenticeship. So how can my husband and I begin to apprentice our kids in money early in a way that equips them to be adults? Because often we let kids go at 18 or 22 without having really trained them up in it. And that's a disservice to those kids. We just don't think about it. At the same time, I think the parents will clarify a lot of their financial habits by being more open with kids about what that looks like. So I think the start of that, I'm a big proponent of a family mission, vision, and values. If the moms on your podcast haven't done that yet, every company has one of these, and yet we often don't for the most important organization in our lives, our families. And so our family has a little mission statement we have for a family. We have a vision for what we want our kids to be like. The mission is to live humbly, to love mercy, to live justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before God. Obviously, a Bible verse. The vision is to raise independent, well-adjusted Christian kids who want to spend time with us and each other. So how are we equipping them to be that? And then we have values of kindness, kind, curious, and courageous, because our kids are little, so they needed something simple. And with that, you can start to bring them into conversations about investing, about giving, about spending, etc. So we now have family meetings where we talk about those things. At Christmas, we had our first giving meeting where we got together as a family and decided what we were going to do for charity at the end of the year, including giving the kids some money to use for charities on their own. And I found that that's just brought us more deeply together as a family. It's helped check my wife and I about our own habits and what we want our kids to pick up. And hopefully it's equipping our kids, even from a very young age, when they're adults, to live in a way that not only is more prosperous financially, but is more aligned with the Christian faith that we hold dear.
Yeah, I love that. That's so useful. And I am trying to do all those same things with my kids as well. Mine are a little bit older, but trying to really train them in, okay, like here's how we think about money, and here's how we use it. And here's like an account that you need to know. And here's what you never need to do. And all of these things, because otherwise, like you said, we send them out at 18 and good luck. But I'm like, nope, they are going to learn all of that in my house and just set them up for so much success. So thank you so much, John, for this conversation. This has been so helpful.
Brittany, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
All right, that does it with my conversation with John Coleman. As we were talking, I thought of an analogy that I wanted to make sure that I shared as well. As a parent, if you're listening to this, if you're a parent, this will resonate with you. When you give your child a gift, it would be heartbreaking to give your child a gift and have them say, oh, no, like I can't possibly take that. Like, no, thank you. I don't want the gift, because there's other kids who don't have it. So for example, if you really were like, yes, I want to give this kid a bike. I just can't wait to see how excited they're going to be when they open up their new bike. And if they received it with so much guilt, like, oh, I couldn't even take this. Like I couldn't even, like there's kids who don't have bikes. Like how could I possibly have a bike? As a parent, that would be heartbreaking. We want to give our kids good gifts. And God also wants to give us good gifts, and he does give us good gifts. So whether you are blessed with financial abundance or you are blessed with a little bit more than you need, know that the Bible tells us that all good things come from God. Money in itself is not bad. God gives us things so that we can take care of ourselves, so we can take care of our families, and so that we have the means to be able to take care of others as well, whether that is financially, relationally, with our time. He gives us more than we need so that we can turn around and give to others. And when God gives us good things, we should not say, oh no, I couldn't take that possibly. That would be bad. No, we should say, thank you, God, for the blessings that you have given me. Now I want to use it and enjoy it and use it appropriately to have goodness for myself and thankfulness, but also to help others as well. So as always, at the end of this episode, we want to talk about what your next steps are. And the first step really is just to figure out where you are in this conversation. Are you somebody who says, we are truly living hand to mouth, we do not have enough, and you made it this far? Congratulations. But if you are someone who's saying, we actually have more than we need, I think sometimes it starts with just realizing, what? We are actually really blessed. It can be really easy to see social media, to see what other people have, and to think of all the things we don't have, and to feel that little bit of jealousy, that little bit of coveting, that, oh, these people have this and I don't have this, and I wish that I had this other thing, and I want this more for my family too. And it's okay to want things for your family. But I think it starts with first realizing, God, you have given us so much. We are so blessed. Look at this time that we live in. We have internet. We have a device that can connect to the internet. We have clothes. We have shelter. We have food. We have pantries. We have all of these things. So starting with that blessing and just taking a minute to say, God, thank you so much for everything that you have given me. It may not be everything that we want, but it's more than we need. Like, God, thank you so much for everything that you have given me. I am sorry for the times where I've taken it for granted, where I've been selfish, where I've been coveting, where I've been jealous of those around me, where I've been stuck in comparison. I think sometimes we need to have that conversation to realize, we have it really good. So let's be thankful and enjoy it, but then also realize that we do have a obligation to use it well. Like he was talking about the parable of the talents. That's one of my favorite parables in the Bible. When God gives us resources, whatever that is, whether that's money or time, he gives us these so that we will use them wisely, not so that we can use them to just build up ourselves so that we have the biggest houses and the best cars and the most shoes and the, best decorated living room. He gives us them so that we can enjoy them, but also so that we can go and make a difference for others. The truth is there are so many people in the world who are struggling, and they're reaching out and they're crying out to God, like, God, would you please help us in the situation that I'm in? And God said, hey, I gave these people like all of their resources. They need to share. So if you are like I am, one of these people who is like, no, we have more than we need, we are on the sharing end of this spectrum. That's my challenge for you today, is to realize where you are at, whether you truly are super broke and you're like, okay, I'm going to do something about it. Or you say, you know what, we do have more than we need and I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to use my abundance to bless others, to make a difference, to invest it, to give it to however God is calling you to use it today. It's going to look different for every family. There's no one size fit all prescription here, but talk between you and your husband. Figure out, hey, how are we doing? And what is God calling us to do? Because money on its own is not bad. It is just a tool. It's like a hammer or a pizza cutter. Like, it does things. It's just all in how you use it and your mindset. And so often we can forget and not even think about our mindsets. So this is your invitation today, is to get honest. How are you doing? How should you be doing? And have that conversation between you and your husband and between you and God. And you just might figure out, maybe I have a little bit of room for improvement here. And don't feel bad. We all do. So hopefully you have enjoyed this conversation, and I will talk to you again real soon. All right. Bye.